Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the second installment of DreamWeek 2021. Black is. This is coming to you at the beautiful Whitty Museum, and it is a collaboration with the San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum and the San Antonio Kwanzaa Coalition. So we're going to take the time now to introduce you to our esteemed panelists.
Good day. My name is Naomi, something to say Williams Johnson. I'm the proud founder of the San Antonio Quantum Coalition, and I am unapologetically Black.
Michelle Lugalia-Hollon. I am the currently Mary Nierenberg's Director of Policy and excited to be here. I am also unapologetically Black.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Smith, the Chief Executive Officer of the Texas Kidney Foundation, and I am happy to be here to share in this wonderful occasion.
Hi, my name is Hayley Oliverre. I'm a Trinity transplant here in San Antonio. I'm a realtor and a rehabber downtown, and happy to be here.
Hello everyone, my name is Langston Clark and I'm an associate professor in the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and looking forward to hear these stories and share my own. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Washington, and I am a budding entrepreneur in San Antonio, and I'm just happy to be a part of the discussion.
Awesome. I think we can keep the mic over there. I'll just work on talking loud. This will be my cheerleader voice. Oh boy, does that bring back some time, which is what we're going to talk about, and that's being Black. If you watch the first installment of Black Is, you heard some startling definitions about what constitutes Blackness. So we're not going to go there unless you all want to go there. My first question is, when did you first realize you were Black? And can you tell us the circumstances around that? So we'll start with you, Mr. Washington.
Well, since I got the mic, I guess I'll start. For me, I think I'm a testament to good parenting and speaking life into people, because I knew I was Black early on, and I say providentially, because our experiences make who we are, and I was thrust into being. I went to school with nothing but white kids all through pre-K all the way to ninth grade, and privileged white kids. So it was not just white kids, it was privileged white kids, which is a total class to their own. But my parents always spoke life to me. They always told me that I should be unapologetically Black. The first book I ever read was the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. The second one I ever read was the autobiography of Malcolm X. So yes. I got that foundation early on. So it wasn't hard for me to assimilate, to learn not to assimilate, to be a part of my environment, but not be not assimilate to that environment. So I think I'm just a testament to speaking life to your children. So that's, as a father of three children, that's what I'm all about, is speaking life to the kids, to make sure they have that foundation. So I've always known I was Black.
Yeah, for me, it's the same. There was never a moment in my life where I don't ever remember having like that aha moment. People get saved and they know they got saved. I don't have this moment where like I met Black Jesus, you know what I mean? And then I knew I was Black, so it's been something that has been reared into me and socialized into me. It wasn't necessarily something that was a negative experience. I think for someone who grew up like I did, and maybe like some of the rest of you, I probably had like some aha moments about understanding what it meant for people who were passing. Like, you know what I mean? Oh, my godfather, he's Black? And I was real small, and we're supposed to know our people, right? And so when it was like, yeah, Lexi, you didn't know your godfather was Black? And everybody started laughing at me, you know what I mean? Because we're supposed to know. And so I think there were more of these aha moments about who is Black or what it means to be Black in terms of the diversity of Black folk, and not so much about an aha moment for myself realizing and understanding that I was Black.
If you don't mind me asking, Langston, where did you grow up?
So I was born originally in Buffalo, New York, and moved to Pittsburgh for 2 years and moved to New Jersey. So finished elementary school to high school in New Jersey. So
Okay.
yeah, and I guess similar to Brother Washington, I grew up in really diverse schooling, neighborhoods and whatnot, but you would say it was white. You know, you would say that it was upper middle class white neighborhoods. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Haley.
Hi, well, I actually do have an aha moment on being identified as Black. But originally, I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, where there is no definition of, everybody looked like me, or they look like someone in my family, which could be the East Indian side, the African side, the white side, like, you know, so there was no concern about being different from or different than anyone else. So we did not have, you know, and of course there's racial strife there, but there was no, in my mind, we were just all part of the community. My teachers looked like me, the bank workers looked like people like me, so there was nothing until I moved to Canada. So I moved to Canada to go to university. And again, I was thrown into an environment on a mixed race campus, but I had one particular friend, he's still a very good friend to this day, and he's a white, half Jewish boy in Canada. And we were having a conversation, and he said to me, you know, what are you? You know, meaning background, because he had never met anyone like me, really. This is back in the 80s in Toronto, so it wasn't quite as diverse as it is now. And I said to him, I said, what do you think I am? And he said, well, you're Black, right? And I was like, that was my aha moment. I said, oh, well, I guess I am in the context of being in white Toronto, I'm Black. So, and being active on campus at that time, you know, politically with Caribbean Association and such, I always use Black as a political tool. You know, it's Black of culture, not just race, you know, not just skin color, but it's a cultural thing, because it's how it now became how people see you. So that's where my context came in. And now moving to Texas for the last 15 years, it's a whole different environment again, because in Toronto, all the Black people or the non-white people you met were mostly Caribbean people like me, or even African immigrants, having that immigrant experience, which is completely different from having family in Texas for 200 years, and, you know, not having that, you know, history of being in America. So now I'm in just a whole different context. So I'm really happy to be part of this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Tiffany, can you hear us? You want to share with us?
So the first time I realized I was Black, I was a little kid, and I was at the T-ball courts. Like, I knew I was Black, but I didn't know that people thought that it was different in some way. I didn't know that anybody saw us any type of way. And, but my mom had already, like, told me about certain words. So she given me like what I was supposed to say if somebody said the N-word to me. And I was at the T-ball fields, and this little white boy, called me the N-word. And I said, well, my mom had told me, a nigger is an ignorant person, and the only nigger I see around here is you. And then he called me his girlfriend and followed me around for the next however many years he was living out there where I was. But that was the first time I realized that there were people who would actually say something to me about me being Black. And I also felt the power of shutting somebody down if they got ignorant with me. So that was like my go-to from that point forward. If you want to step up to the plate, you get put down.
Wow. Thank you. Miss Michelle?
Awesome. I shared earlier in our conversation that I was born and raised in Kenya. I lived there for 13 years. I grew up in Nairobi, which is the capital of Kenya, so grew up with Black people all around me. And so, and being in an African country, being in an East African country, being in Kenya specifically, is a country made up of different tribes. And so the dominant identity in our country was to identify as a specific tribe. And so Black as an identity was not something that we discussed. It was not something that we had to mark down anywhere. It was not something that we necessarily called each other. And so, but I do remember very vividly listening to I'm Black and I'm Proud for the first time, but say it louder. And I remember saying it, and my father was in the room, and I remember saying it for the first time as a child, but kind of not really knowing what it meant, but that being maybe the first time I declared myself as Black as a child, as part of understanding and learning about the Black beauty and the Black power movement. But I would say the first time I experienced the Black identity as something that wasn't just implicit or just a big part of my surroundings or who I am, as not part of being an other, was migrating to America. And from immigration forms to school forms at the age of 13, learning very quickly that that was something I had to put down everywhere. And each time that being kind of a resonating reminder, like in this country, this is a category and an identity that you have to let people know, accept, and also then assimilate to, before even necessarily even knowing all the messages and everything that comes with that. And so coming into my Blackness in America has been very different than kind of growing and living in my Blackness in Africa. And it has very different implications, which I'm sure we'll all get into. But the experience of kind of becoming Black through very intentional opportunities to it, but mostly through institutions asking you to check it every second, was my first experience, I think my earliest experience of subscribing to that identity in America.
My earliest recollection, and I was just talking with Deborah about this the other night. I didn't really come from I'm sorry.
There we go.
Too used to this. I didn't come from an environment that was extremely diverse, even though I went to multicultural schools from kindergarten up until high school. But I didn't have the first realization that I was Black until I was about third grade. And I was very into books. I was very much the bookworm in my class. I always had a book. And the first book that I read during that time, the first book that I touched on when it came to race was in second grade. There was this book by Judy Blume called Iggy's House. And it came to be my very favorite book because they were just friends. And that's how I saw myself as one of the characters that was friends with somebody that didn't look like them, but it didn't really resonate that I was Black until third grade. And we were reading two books. We had this one book called Roll Thunder, Hear My Cry. And that book just spoke to me because I had grandparents that were from the Deep South, and they were sharecroppers. So I could really align myself to that story, even though at that time I had never been down south. And there was a second book called Warriors Don't Cry, and it was about the Little Rock Nine. And my teacher read in the book, there was a time where Ruby Bridges was getting escorted to school, and she was called a nigger, she said. And my teacher was white. And she said, now don't say this to each other. I'm going to read this word, but you don't call people this word. And it stung me, but I didn't know why it stung me that she said it. And I didn't tell my mom because my mom was in the military at the time. I didn't want mom to come out the bag. But I couldn't really understand why that stung me. And I realized that throughout that time, from about third to fifth grade, I had this complex with darker skinned women. Because my mom is mahogany, my grandmother was mahogany, my great-grandmother is even more mahogany than them. And because of the multicultural environment that I was in, I'm a brown-skinned woman, and everything was, oh, you so Black, you so Black, you so Black. And I remember distinctly, this is like during the 94, 95 Olympics, Surly Bonale, I think that's her name, the Black figure skater, the only one I was able to backflip. And I was so taken with her. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's so black. And my grandmother got instantly offended. And my mom had to sit me down and have a talk, said, what do you feel about black skin? Because grandma thinks that you don't like hers. And we had a really deep conversation from that point on, and race still didn't really sink in, but that was the first time that I remember understanding what black is and how heavy that word can be when used wrong.
Wow.
Can I ask Naomi a question? So I want to know about the experience with the teacher, right?
Uh-huh.
Because I don't know if you're familiar, but Texas just made it lawful to teach ethnic studies in schools. I think it's high school.
High school.
And so as an elective, students can take an African American studies course. And I know even at the elementary level, you know, Black History, we get our month in school, Black History Month. So you might get a book like the one that your teacher read. And I'm just wondering, I understand the sting, but part of me understands why the teacher would say the word, right? Because it's in the book,
Right.
And it's part of the truth of the story.
Right.
How do you interact with that moving forward, right? And how do educators deal with that from your perspective? Given that a lot of our educators are white women. You know what I mean?
I'm a woman with 1,000 stories. Deborah tell you this. Anybody ever knows? I have a story for every instance. But this really happened to me. I was at a writer's retreat a few years back before I moved to Texas. And the writer his name was Chris, don't remember his last name, but he was a professor at Columbia University, which is really prominent for writers.
Black?
He was white.
Okay.
Reading his story, very well read. We were dissecting and we were going through it. He said, and there was a guy in the class that said nigger because it was in the book, but he said it with hard ER, like he's used to saying this. Yeah. And the energy shifted. So me being the only person in that particular class, he came to me, or only black person in that class, he came to me after and he said, I'm sorry if that offended you. And I think the onus is with educators is to read the room. If you have kids, if you have 60% black kids and you got 30% white kids and 2 others in there, you have to have that conversation. Because you just can't, it's just like throwing, I just told you about my personal story, it's like throwing a grenade under somebody's car and then walking off. You still have all the responsibility if that goes on or off, or if it's detonated, you still put it there. So you have that onus to describe what that is, to break it down, if it derails the conversation or derails the lesson plan for that day, you have to. Because if you're gonna introduce something that heavy to the classroom, you have to deal with the after results.
Wow, thank you. Tiffany, did I see your hand or were you waving at us?
I was just waving.
Oh.
I was just waving at Zach. He turned his camera around.
Okay, got it. Well, okay. So I'm going to do more question and asking, but I did want to share something that I shared with Anthony. And when we introduced ourselves, what you didn't hear from Anthony, he did a project called The Black Experience. And he interviewed 14 different people about their story, and it's on YouTube. And I thought we'd be able to show some clips, but I think this conversation is going to be so rich that we probably won't. But this is the story that I shared with him. Like him, and like most of us, I grew up where it was very nurturing. I was black and everyone around me was black. Even though I lived in a mixed neighborhood, it was okay being black. My grandparents were from Selma, Alabama. We would go see them. I was very protected. I mean, I remember going to Selma when I was 5 in the early 60s. So my parents had a green book and they had the triptych, but I didn't know. And I didn't know why we had to have fried chicken in the window, right? And Kool-Aid in the thermos, because we couldn't stop. I didn't know why I had to have my own little potty chair in the car. I'm like, well, wait, we were passing all these restaurants. My parents protected me from that. But the same story kind of resonates with all of us in that in Columbus, Ohio, that is kind of the end of the Underground Railroad. And Chillicothe, Ohio, has the most mulattoes per capita, they used to anyway, than any other place in the United States. And by the way, I was actually born on the north side of Pittsburgh, but that's a whole other, I'll talk about that later. But anyway, I was dark. All my friends are lighter than me. They're all from Columbus. So I was a little chocolate girl. And that was interesting, being called black by someone who was black. Well, I'm like, wait a minute, but you're black. I don't get it. And it was very distressing because my father has mahogany skin. I would go home just like crying to Daddy, I don't understand. And this is what he told me: the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. And that is what I hung my hat on, and that's how it propelled me forward. So, your black story, when you realized you were black, did it propel you forward or did it hold you back? And can you share a little bit about that? You look like you had something really to say.
No,
Like,
I mean, the way both of them were talking about how they found their blackness here in America, like that's something that's kind of just is mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we've been faced with it all our life. Like I said, for me, I knew that I was black early on because of my nurturing, but at the same time, it was thrown in my face but I was prepared for it. My point is I was prepared for that assault of my blackness early on because of my nurturing and, you know, because of the way I talk, because, you know, I'm dark, whatever. I did face contention, you know, but I was prepared for it. So it's just like I said, my testament is to my parents. That's all I can really say.
But can I piggyback off of your thought though?
Yeah.
I know Deborah asked a question, but I feel like we're going with the flow right now.
yeah, absolutely.
Blame show. So when we had this conversation a few years ago, Show and I and a few other people about surrounding the Rachel Dolezal conversation, and I was so excited when I finally got to the meat of this very thing that he has a habit of just throwing something on the table and walking off and watch everybody talk about it. But it was so poignant because I identify as an American African. I came to find my African heart in my 20s. But I was always affirmed in my blackness. I was always reminded that I'm great. But as I started to do my own research and just do a lot of soul searching, I came to find that we're all mad about kinship. And I know in the black community, we have this saying, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. But we have to go back to where these ideas were introduced.
Right.
And that's where the division comes in. Post-colonialism, there were a lot of things that broke us down to tribalism, which also went into classism, which also went into color struck, is what I'm down, so I'm just gonna say how I feel. But we came into these idioms and these isms within ourselves that kept us divided. So when it comes to continental Africans and American Africans, we're always gonna be pointing the finger, why you feel that way? Why you feel that way? Why aren't we asking who instilled these ideas to make us feel this way? Because it all boils down to tribalism. Because my ancestors came on different ships, your ancestors came on different ships. My ancestors may have came in 1619, yours may have been on the last ship. I don't know, we'll never know. But how do we get back from here? So the fact that they didn't understand blackness till they came here, why wasn't it being instilled on the continent just like we were instilled who we were? Is everything, when it comes to our greatness and our legacy, is slavery, slavery, slavery. Our stories then begin with slavery. I'm pretty sure you can go down your heritage and your lineage and name the kings and the queens, and maybe she wasn't a queen, maybe she was the fourth wife. However that goes, just not speaking for you, but just saying facetiously, we don't have that. We don't have those stories that are linked back to a win. We just know how we got here. That's always been taught from elementary school up until college. And in college, you get the real meat because you have to pay for that knowledge. When it's free, they're not gonna give it to you. You gotta go and look for it. But when you pay for it, they're gonna tell you, this is how this happened. This is how this happened. Oh, actually, there was a black president before Barack Obama. He's on a $2 bill. This is how he came to be. The things that we should know is taken from us. So when it comes down to Blackness, it's so hard to even really pinpoint what that is. We just know we're proud of it because you told me to hate myself. So if it's bad, I have to like it. If Black is such a bad and heavy word to you, that means to me I have to be proud of it. That's why we took away the ER and put the A on the end. And that's a whole different conversation. Because what's been bad for the massa has always been good for the work and the help. So.
Yeah, and I'd love to clarify, because I never like to come across as meaning something that I don't intend to. So in the spirit of conversation, I would say that I've always known that I'm Black. I saw Black people growing up. I think my experience of Blackness, the meaning of Blackness, how I grew up in Kenya, which is absolutely different for kids who are growing up in Kenya now too, because the world is flatter, as you know, and there's so much connection across the globe than there were before when I was a child.
I can't hear you.
I apologize. I'm talking about my childhood in Kenya. But I will say I'm not saying that I never knew that I was Black, but my experience of Blackness and my identity and the meaning of Blackness changed when I came to America. And my Blackness in Kenya didn't require me to declare it as a decision point or as a marker of at any time of my childhood. But as soon as I started filling out school paperwork, free lunch paperwork, library cards, all of a sudden I had to proclaim that I was Black, and I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. And so the culture of Blackness that I grew up with is very different than the culture of Blackness here. And Black as identity here is very different than the Black identity that I grew up in Africa, in Kenya. And so I wanted to just distinguish those two. I think in the context of this conversation in this moment, and as we get ready for Black History Month, that, you know, especially us Africans in diaspora, our experience of navigating this space between being Black in America and being African, and being Black and African, and depending on where you are in the state, is a very fluid and interesting experience, and it has its highs and lows, and hope we get to talk a little bit about that later as well. Deborah, I don't remember your question, so I don't know if you want us to answer it still, or should I pass this around?
Either. So the question was, did the defining moment when you realized you were Black, did it propel you forward or did it hold you back? And share that. So when you moved to America and you realized Black was it had a different meaning culturally, how tell us about that. What was that like? What was that aha?
Well, so Houston, Texas, that was my initiation into America, which is a beautiful and special place. There's all sorts of cultures. I grew up with Vietnamese, Japanese, white, Filipino, Indian, Pakistani kids in the same school. I will say that as an African coming to the United States, we already were pretty familiar with, I would say, the ambassadors of Black culture. We loved Black music. We loved Black movies. We loved Black, superheroes who we saw from our perspective. There was an enamorment, I think, with just Black culture, in the sense of we wanted to be Black. We thought it was cool. It was all the best music was coming from Black people. My father always had African American books in our household. I read Hear My Rolling Thunder, Hear My Cry. We were familiar with key Black figures. We were familiar with key Black stories. And so for my brother and I, who came here when I was about to be 13, we were so excited about Black culture and being there and finally having proximity to this beautiful American thing that we've always kind of romanticized, to use a term that was used earlier. I think that was something we found, that was something we were able to embrace, that was something we were able to identify with and express ourselves through. On the other side of that, you know, being teenagers in a high school and being African, and so coming in and obviously from our accents and ourselves and our hair and how we were, it was clear that we were not African American. It was clear that we were not black in that sense. And I think there was a little bit of tension kind of coming in and realizing that you're not the cool kids. You haven't perfected your Blackness. And my brother, I think, had a faster go at it. I think he changed his accent. He lost his accent much quicker in code switch when we get back home. Mine is still here, as you can hear it. I didn't have as easy over time. But, you know, so that experience of being African in the diaspora, attempting to then come into a community that you've now physically being told you're a part of, but being in that community, you realize that there's so many steps to go. And I think there were beautiful moments in that. I think there were hurtful moments in that. You know, definitely had Black kids in my class ask a lot of questions about living on trees and lions and being dusty and, you know, all of the stereotypes that come with, you know, being African in America. And that was a little hurtful because I think we thought that from a signaling perspective, that was our community. And so you do find, and I'm curious about your Caribbean perspective, that in America, then you'll find Africans really isolating into their own communities. And they kind of create their own communities within America. And there's some negative and positive discussions and comparisons that start there. And in which you compare yourself to those African Americans, and we're, you know, hearing from our parents, we're not like that. We need to distinguish ourselves. We need to carry on and navigating then how to reach our own conclusions about what we're going to embrace and what we're going to keep and what it looks like to move forward. At the same time, which is something that I'm super mindful about, I know that I wasn't born in this country. I know that I don't have the experiences that most African Americans have had in this country. I cannot claim that. And so I'm also, while I'm embracing of my Black identity, I always make sure that when people are asking me to speak from that perspective, that I distinguish my experience as very different. And my orientation to Blackness and my orientation to racism in this country and discrimination comes from a very different place, and I cannot seek to represent everything that I would say most African Americans have experienced in this country. I've experienced it in a different way, but certainly have not had as much exposure.
I kind of want to ask a question to that, because I grew up with, there were a couple of African neighbors in my neighborhood, and we were told, well, there was always, like, we never fooled with them, because we were told, they're Africans, they don't fool with us, like they're totally different. And they did kind of display kind of angst towards us, like, oh, they're American Blacks, they're beneath us. I mean, what was your experience with that? Like, did your parents ever, pretty sure your parents didn't instill that, but I know that is kind of a black mark on.
I mean, I would say that those thoughts are definitely present in African diaspora and in some families. I think most parents are coming from a place where they're seeking to protect.
Right.
And I think the burden of racism in this country forces us to want to separate ourselves from, I think, like, while trying to pursue privilege or whatever.
Right.
And so you want to say, and I think this country rewards that because of that internalized racism. There's a rewarding of being other and exotic as well, versus just being, oh, you're just African American, you know, like, oh no, you're from Kenya. Now I really want to open up and talk to you. I feel more comfortable. So many questions. I've been there, you know, in a different way than if I had said out loud, I'm African American.
Right.
You're not hearing anything here. But I will say, unfortunately, that those perceptions in some places. I would give the example of my father, who, when we moved here, we lived in a very poor neighborhood. We were super worried about my brother and I. He worked, one of his second job was at the Texas jail, the Harris County jail downtown.
Okay.
And he would come down and he would say, all the people in the jail are African Americans. You cannot go down that path, you will not be mistaken that way. They're this and they're that, they're criminals. The more he worked there, the more he started to open himself up and to begin to notice trends and just watching the data come walking into those doors every day, you could see him start changing. And we lived in that neighborhood for a long time. And I remember one time we were walking to a store and an African-American man stopped, a younger man stopped my dad. And I'm like, first of all, my dad doesn't know anybody in this neighborhood. He's in and out. So I was like, why are we being stopped right now? And the man looked at my father and he says, Officer Angano. And I was with him. He said, I'm so grateful for you. I remember you, and I was in jail at this time, and you were the only one that talks to me as if I was a human. And then he looked at me and he said, your dad is really cool. And I remember looking at my dad and I said, well, aren't you glad? Racist up in there and treating African Americans who were in your care in a horrible way, because what situation would we have been in right now? And I'm so grateful for your evolution in this country, where I could point to when you were telling us not to go into that community, and now we are having conversations about how we got here as a country and why there's so many African Americans in jail, and how you can see them through all the stereotypes that have been pummeled into you, and how it's changed you now as a person, and you may have saved our lives. This could have been a different situation, and so I think it's changing. I think it's always going to be there, but I think also the more Africans live in this country, and there's something in public health, which is what I was trained in, called weatherization or assimilation of culture. Like when the longer immigrants stay in this country, the more exposed they are to the discriminatory and prejudicial practices and the institutions in this country, the more they begin to resemble the health statuses of the race that they are assigned to. And that has been studied over and over again, cut this way and that way. There's something about this country that starts getting under your skin based on your race. And the longer that I've seen Africans stay here, I've seen that mindset begin to change, because at the end of the day, when the police light is shone on you in that car, they don't know.
They don't know.
They don't know.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Wow.
Hayley, since we're talking about the propelling you forward and holding you back, did you see a difference between, well, you mentioned some, let me rephrase the question. What was some of the biggest differences between Trinidad, Tobago, Toronto, and San Antonio, as far as your Blackness goes?
Well, as I mentioned before, growing up in Trinidad, everyone looks like you, more or less, and put something in your family, as I said, where you have, most families have a mix of everybody, because there's a lot of intermarrying. I mean, the whole biracial, my grandparents were, on both sides, were mixed race marriages. I have an Indian grandfather married to a French Creole grandmother on one side, and a Portuguese grandfather married to another French Creole grandmother on the other side. So it's just mixed all around. So I grew up with with that whole mulatto mix in the family, and and that's been my experience. Going to Canada again, very white culture again back in the 80s. As I mentioned, the one friend who identified me as Black, which wasn't something that I really thought about growing up. That just kind of propelled me into thinking about how other people saw me, which I never really, it's not something that I think about day to day. I just think about how I feel about myself, but it started making me think about what are these Canadians seeing in me? What do they see when they look at me? So that kind of opened my eyes that way. But again, with the diversity of Toronto and being on a college campus, it was not much of an issue. Moving to the US now, of course, I'm much older moving to the US. It was another thing too, because now when I moved to San Antonio, I had the same experience with you. Then you start looking for people of color, because we're in a middle class neighborhood. It's a lot of, fair skinned people, even the white Mexicans, you can't tell that they're Mexican, but they're just white people. But so you start looking for people, but then when I look at a Black person in Canada, there's an identity there, because more than 90% of the time they're from the islands, or their parents are from the islands, so there's that connection. Moving here, when I saw an African American person, that connection wasn't there. because their families, they have their history here. They're not Caribbean, so there was that little bit of a disconnect. And even with my husband, who's Caribbean, but he's black, as in, African heritage. He had that disconnect too, because then we had to sort of re-identify again now with a whole different identity, culture, and understanding all what you were saying about what your dad experienced with seeing the African American experience with the history specifically to the United States. That was that was something we had to bring our head around too, because it's not the history we grew up with in the Caribbean. Even though we had slavery in the Caribbean, and my grandmothers, I'm sure they were, there's history there, which in Trinidad we don't really delve into too much history. We just kind of take every day at a time. But we had, we had to, that was the differentiation, and just really identifying with people here and understanding that there's a difference between growing up black in the Caribbean and black in North America, and especially in the US more than Canada. So, so that's, my eyes are opened even more, even moving from Toronto where I had that aha moment, and then here, having to relearn all of that again and understand people's history and where they're coming from. So, and we're still doing, I'm still evolving, because when you hear the statistics and you start thinking, why is this and why is that? I do have black Caribbean friends that we argue with, because they see one thing and we see another thing, and they see the statistics and they see, well, why are so many black men in jail, and then I have to direct them to, you have to look at the history, and you have to look at, Jim Crow and everything going back, and why it is where we are today. And some Caribbean people just don't get that, because they just haven't evolved in their head, and there's always that conversation.
Can I ask? Because she touched on Jim Crow, and we never hear the Jim Crow stories, because we know colonialism was a planetary thing, but we never hear about it as much in the West Indies. So, and especially continental, we hear colonialism, but we don't hear about the Jim Crow. Did y'all have something like the Jim Crow in the Caribbean?
It was, going back before my time, I remember my mother made a comment years ago. Trinidad became independent in 1962. That's when they separated themselves from England as an independent nation with their own government. We have who they call the father of our independence, Eric Williams. He was our first prime minister. And I remember my mother saying, in recent years, and she's passed on now, but within the last 5 years or so, and she was saying, back then, even in the banks, because Trinidad has a very mixed race population, she said, even in the banks, the tellers were always the fairer skinned, the white people got the jobs in the banks as the tellers. And she mentioned recently that Eric Williams he petitioned for that to change. Like, you have to have representation. All the frontline workers, up front were the whites of Trinidad, had the better jobs. And things like that started changing, in her time. So that was maybe back in the 50s, so we've had that, and then in the 60s. So we've had that evolution, and it's still evolving today, because, the whites of Trinidad still historically were the plantation owners, and you have inherited wealth through that, so you still, I'm not saying like Trinidad is any kind of diverse racial paradise, but just the fact that growing up, you still had, Eric Williams again, he was, I don't even know what he was racially. I knew he was black, but he seemed fairer, and must have had something else in him, but you still always grew up with, the teachers and the workers and the people that was, and that does a lot to help with your self-esteem, really. Absolutely. As a kid growing up, so that, so in terms of specifically Jim Crow, there wasn't anything in law, but certainly in practice, things that happen and still happen today. In terms of who owns or who are the wealth owners in Trinidad, you still have that today. But Trinidad especially is more, a lot of it is mostly based on class, I would say, more than race.
So this question is for Langston and Tiffany. Both of you all are in positions a little different, but you deal with a diverse culture. Dr. Clark, you represent a university that is a large university. Tiffany, you represent a large foundation, and I see your hair is curly, and Dr. Clark, I'm loving those locks. Talk to me about being Black, the thought of not having to assimilate, being who you are, being comfortable with who you are, and where you work. And actually, we can even add that to Michelle as well. But we'll start with you.
I remember I used to wear suits every day to work. Like the first year and a half. Just not a suit, it was like slacks, shirt, and tie. I always kept a nice shape up, whatever, And I've never thought of myself as assimilating, right? So I come from a culture, like, my training is in education. I'm teaching teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a standard of professionalism in teaching that I don't necessarily think about as necessarily being assimilated, but there's a large responsibility because you're working with other people's kids, right? And so there's a way that you present yourself going into schools, and I'm trying to model that for the teachers that I'm training. But I went on my office hours after class one day with a student, and one of the ladies from the 4th floor, so that's like where all the big wigs are, She's like, oh, did you have a presentation today? And my student's in the elevator with me. And I'm like, yes, I have a presentation every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 o'clock. But she didn't get it, right? She didn't get that I was the professor. And what was interesting is that I realized it doesn't matter how I dress. It doesn't matter. I don't like dressing up. I was supposed to be a PE teacher. I'm not supposed to be wearing suits to begin with. You know what I'm saying? So at that point, I was like, listen, I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. I know that there are certain times where, I have to dress a certain way.
Absolutely.
Growing my locks out is like a thing. Like, I'm a man, so I got to do it while I can. You know what I mean? So I was like, this is my last hurrah. Let's see how long they can get, before it looks bad for me to have my forehead back here. I'm going to do it way before that. So I don't think I operate even with, in all honesty, thinking about like whether or not I'm assimilating or giving up my Blackness to be in a particular space. But that does come with like the fact that I have a title too, right? Like I have a doctorate. And so like there's certain things, like people still call me Dr. Clark at the end of the day.
Because you worked hard for that, Dr.
I know,
Clark.
and that makes a difference. So me operating the way that I do, because I have a certain level of social status, that doesn't necessarily mean that another Black person working in the same space or another Black person in a different space has the same latitude to do what I do without incurring the same repercussions. And sometimes I just like to dress up. So I think I don't operate with the burden of concerning myself as to whether or not I have to assimilate with my hair, my dress, my talk. It's something that comes natural to me because I grew up in diverse spaces, right? So like code switching in the way that like a foundational Black American or ADOS Black American would have to do with something that's natural to me even more so than other people who haven't necessarily grown up in the most diverse racial, ethnic, or class environment.
Okay,
That's powerful because just the year that I moved here, 2015, we moved the same year. What happened to me when I first found a real job, because I worked a bunch of gigs. The very first job I had at a call center, there was this whole debate in Essence and Ebony, all the Black women periodicals about, do we wear our hair wraps in the workplace? How do we usher that in? So So I took a leap of faith and jumped off the ledge, came to work the first day. I had on a head wrap and matched, looked appropriate, everything. I got so many compliments from HR. Remember this part? HR, oh, that's so beautiful. How'd you do that? Da, 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 da. Go on the floor in the call center. The supervisor comes to me, complimenting. Third day compliments. He said, that's cute, but you can't wear that. I said, well, why not? He said, it's for religious reasons. I said, no. And he said, he points to another black woman had something like a hair wrap on. He was like, she wears it for religious reasons. And I was like, well, no, I wear this for my culture. I represent myself. You don't have any cut. And he cuts himself off before he can say you don't have any culture. He said, you can't wear that just because you're black. Walks off. Long story short, I go to HR. The same HR that just complimented me 3 days prior, they asked me to let him apologize to me for the offense. I asked the woman that was wearing it for religious reasons, was she wearing? She said, no, I have lupus. So it's that very thing of being presented. You have to present yourself when you walk in these spaces. Deborah will tell y'all wear gym shoes in a heartbeat. I just wore gym shoes at the Taliban because I felt like it. Like, I'm really over this place of having to make white people, let's call it what it is. I'm not making white people feel comfortable with me just being here because my skin is gonna offend you if I'm wearing a tuxedo or if I'm wearing a toga. You're like, why is she here? What did you do to deserve my air? And that's the society that we're living in. So yeah, I had to throw that on the table because that right there burns me up even to this day. I love to see Show in a suit, but I have yet to see Show in jeans, just walking into a meeting like I'm here because I deserve to be. I don't have to present myself to you, just as I'm not asking anybody to present themselves to me.
So Tiffany, I don't want to monopolize time, but I want to respond. So I think sometimes we can we got issues with respectability politics, right?
Yes.
And so if Show like dressing like that, that's just him.
That's his prerogative.
Just
That's his
do that.
prerogative.
And I think sometimes we got to be careful with our critiques of blackness and the way we express it, and then projecting that this person has assimilated, or that this person is subscribing. And I'm not saying what you're saying, or this person is subscribing to respectability politics when they just want to be clean in the way that they feel like being clean. You know what I mean? So, and everybody has a moment when they want to dress down and they want to dress up. So just want to be mindful.
Well, and I just want to comment on that. So that's so funny, talking about dressing for your blackness, right? So we have a joke in the office. Okay, what is Deborah going to wear today that's got some African in it somewhere? You know, so they're like waiting, right? And I tried my best to mess them up today. But the Converses that I was going to wear, because it's all about Converses and pearls right now, right? Had pink in them. They've got like a pink tongue. And I didn't have anything that I could put on pink that made sense to be on this platform. But those Converse and pearls was still going to reflect my blackness. And it was going to be a suit. Because I'm going to be Kamala down today.
Come on.
It was going to be a suit with pearls and Converses. But I said, okay, that's not going to work for this. So let me just go back to what my staff is going to expect me to wear. But to that end, we can wear whatever we want to. And that's the key. But I want Tiffany, I know you're waiting to say something, Miss Texas Kidney Foundation, and all the spaces you go to, from the governor's house to the White House and every place in between.
Well, you know, I was gonna say, I want to go back like a little bit and say that I think listening to everybody's stories on the panel, I'm probably I didn't grow up in the nurturing environment that you all did. I did within my family unit, but I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, which is surrounded by all white towns and a very strong connection to white supremacy. So I was always aware of my blackness, and what it meant to the people around me, to the other ethnic groups around me, but also what it meant to my group. And so, my mother spent a great deal of time instilling in me that everything I needed was within me, and that I was strong and proud and Black, and that was something to be revered and to walk in strength in. And so when I decided to cut all of my relaxed hair off and be authentically me, anybody who was crazy enough to challenge that, which nobody did, people don't really do that, but not to me. But I was just like, this is my hair grows out of my head like this, and I'm gonna wear it just like this. If somebody doesn't like it, get over it.
That part.
And if you are ignorant enough to come up to me to talk to me about it, I'll be more than happy to help you to understand why I should not and will not uh, justify my existence and why I get to walk this earth with this curly hair. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of every aspect of being Black, because this country that we're about to have an inauguration for a country that would not exist were it not for Black labor, that would not exist were and have the economic fortitude that we have were it not for Black people and all that we've contributed here. So yeah, when I look at my hair, I see beauty. And when I look at yours, I see the same thing. So, I definitely had, because we were in an environment that was so filled with hatred in terms of the strong connection to white supremacy. Uh, like I said, my mother spent a lot of time making sure that I understood how beautiful Black really was. And so when I finally did hit the scene and I was around people that were not in my circle, I was strongly confident in who I was as a young Black girl and subsequently a Black woman.
So I would like for all of you all to share what one thing in your particular culture, so that's in Anthony's culture and Langston's culture, and Hayley's culture, Tiffany's, Michelle's, Naomi's, what one thing in your culture would you like to see celebrated more?
It's a good one. I'd like to celebrate diversity within we're not a monolith. Obviously, as you can see, everybody has different experiences. I like to celebrate our diversity. Like I'm from the hood and everything, but I like the Beatles. I like to listen to Green Day, and like we're not. I like for us to celebrate our differences and the fact that we're not a monolith. Like we all come from different experiences. There's not one definition to being Black. And that it's crazy that we even have to have this conversation in the first place. It kind of speaks to like the systematic, the system that has been installed. It's an actual system, because if something works over and over and over again, it's a system.
Yeah.
And so we're all a part of that system, and it's crazy that we even have to have this conversation in the first place, because there is no, white people don't sit around and have these conversations. Hispanics, Asians, we're the only group that can have this conversation of what Black is. So I like to celebrate our diversity.
Thank you. For me, I'm wearing it, and I would just want to acknowledge the fact that what I see is a renaissance and appreciation for Black colleges, and the appreciation for going to a Black college, the appreciation for the contributions of these institutions in really sort of laying the foundation for what is the Black middle class in America. And I think even with Kamala Harris's position as the Vice President of the United States, that there's going to be more attention given to that. But even before that, there's a lot more recognition in terms of fashion, in terms of what Black colleges are able to do for Black students in ways that even the most prestigious, predominantly white institutions aren't able to do. Is something that is worthy of the renaissance, cultural renaissance and appreciation that it's going for now. And I appreciate seeing that being celebrated in ways that maybe didn't happen 10 years ago or so.
Well, I sort of agree with Anthony on the diversity thing, but if you're speaking about Trinidad culture, of course, you have to celebrate the music and the carnival. So, and that's what we try to do with Calabash, you know, as a Caribbean as a whole, and we'll be at it again next year.
Awesome. Ms. Tiffany?
I'd like to see us celebrate our accomplishments more. We tend to hold up like a few Black people from history instead of looking at just the true body of what we have given to this nation. So I'd like to see us highlight people that we've never seen highlighted before, but that should be.
Thank you.
All of my thoughts have been given, but I'll say, I think one of the qualities of, ironically, after having to write it down in so many places and have to say that you're Black so often in this country, I find that we are so invisible at the same time. And there is a system where you could buy your visibility. For example, I chose to go to very expensive, predominantly white institutions, and as soon as I drop that name, or as soon as the qualification is on paper before I walk in the room, all of a sudden I'm there. And I've been in many situations where it's some of the same people I've been in rooms with, I'll run into at a grocery store in a different setting and walked right past, don't see me. And I find that such a painful reminder and experience that I feel a lot of people universally who are African American or Black in this country experience. Just as much as this country oppresses us, that we are, and makes such an example and a mark of us, that we are also so invisible. It's just mind-boggling to me in so many ways. So I'd like to celebrate our here-ness, and I'd like to celebrate our visibility, and I'd like to, in whatever form that comes, I want to see that. I want to see us in more places. I want to see us in boring places. I want to see us in all sorts of places. And I want to celebrate it in all those places as a repudiation of that invisibility that is put upon us very often.
This is gonna take everybody by surprise, but what I would like to see uplifted in our culture is how we mourn. In my family, when I first went to college, I didn't finish, but when I first went to college, I went for funeral sciences, because I'm a person that looks at money, like how can I make it when I sleep? And when I went, we had taken a field trip to the morgue, and I was like, yeah, that's the end of that. So, but I've always just in my what do they call that? Anyway, basically taking it on myself. I've always studied death and dying. I am a doula, a death doula. So I usher people into the hereafter on their own terms. So with how we mourn is so special as Black people, and we don't talk about it enough, because from the time that we get the call, whatever time of day, the midnight hour, the early morning, we get that call, that one person that's going to be the mouth of the South, which is me and my family, obviously. So I get the call more often than not. In 2020, I got the call a lot. And it was so unique because I couldn't usher myself home every time. So I had to create my own space for mourning. And it happened more faster than I've ever been able to really comprehend. Because standard in Black families, when we mourn, it's like that 7-day ritual. It's the first 2 days of calling everybody, you getting called back, how, what, why, you're talking to the funeral parlors to come and pick them up, you're making those arrangements if you're that person. And then the 3rd day, you're making arrangements. Okay, well, what did it look like? Did they say what they wanted to wear? Did you know where they wanted to go? Who's gonna cook this? Who making potato salad? Pearl can't make it. She make nasty. Like, it's just that those conversations leading up until the homegoing, because there is a difference. You have a homegoing and you have a funeral. Some people don't get homegoing. Some people get funerals because they was a cuss on earth. We can't send you home because we don't know where you're going. Then you got Big Mama that we knew she was going home because she lived her life. She did the things that she came here to do. So just really exploring how we mourn is so unique and it's so special because in my family, up until that day before, and I don't know if a lot of other Black families do this, but the day before the celebration, we meet up either at the deceased house or we meet up at the point person's house. I don't have a house, I have an apartment. So if I had a big house, everybody would come to my house and we cook and cook, whether for the repast, which is the celebration after the funeral services, or we just, hey, pick some up from Popeyes, what you want from the liquor store, that type of deal. And we sit around and we talk and we either reconnect with one another, which I hate, because family reunions are so integral, but they're dying. And we don't have our reunions until it's time to send somebody home. But we're really having those big conversations that group us all back together. And whether we're making these promises we don't fulfill, it's just having that space to say, I know we're gonna miss Big Mama, but I'll miss you even more because I'm looking at you. And I can tell you this, or that fight that's been going on for 5 years finally happens. It's just having that space with Black people to be on that one accord. And I really, really wish somebody would really explore what that is, how we mourn, especially with Black Lives Matter, all the men and women that we've lost. What does that look like for us? Because we do have joy in our mourning. And it's very unique. It don't look like what everybody thinks it's gonna look like. It'll be one moment me and Deborah crying, oh my God, and this might play Marvin Gaye. The next thing you know, the whole house erupts in this joyous mourning moment. So I would just love to see that.
This has been incredible, and I look forward to Black is 3.0. Thank you all so much. And we didn't say it at the onset, but just so you know, this was a closed set. You're looking at everyone in this very large auditorium, other than the camera crew, which is one person. Thank you so much, Legend Productions. Thank you to this panel. And you all be safe out there. Remember, wear your mask. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Ding dong. That was amazing.
This was a great conversation.